Hey everybody, this is Chris Masterjohn. This is episode 57 of Mastering Nutrition. This is a special episode where we have the recording of the February 1st, 2019 Ask Me Anything About Nutrition session, where holders of the CMJ Masterpass asked me whatever they wanted to about nutrition.
This is Mastering Nutrition with Chris Masterjohn. Take control of your health, master the science, and apply it like a pro. Are you ready?
In this episode, we cover things like what would I recommend instead of whole bone calcium from traditional foods market for a bone meal powder that is less chalky to be mixed into your food, nutritional causes of low white blood cells and possible solutions, supplements or other things to lower anxiety at night and improve heart rate variability during sleep, supplements and other things, lifestyle factors even, to improve deep sleep. Whether I recommend probiotic cycling, I don't have a tremendous to say about that, but I do share some thoughts. The ways to understand how, besides genetic testing, how do you understand how the enzyme COMT is functioning inside yourself by looking at signs and symptoms? This is an enzyme that, on the one hand, modulates your estrogen levels in a way that impacts your risk of cancer, and on the other hand, modulates your dopamine levels in a way that regulates the balance of how fluid or how stable your mind is. We talk about things like, what if TSH is normal but T4 is low? And is that normal TSH really normal? Everyone's concerned about TSH being high, but I raise the question, is this particular case, is that normal TSH really lower than it should be? Should you be concerned more about overall fat intake or specifically about saturated fat intake if you have familial hypercholesterolemia, which is a genetic problem with cholesterol levels and heart disease? Is taking sodium bicarbonate, baking soda, to alkalinize in the long term, is taking it all the time harmful? And what are other ways that you can really get to the root of the problem of why you're running acidic and get off the bicarbonate? Could we talk a little bit about magnesium getting in through the skin? We don't talk a lot about it. We talk about the relationship between Lp(a) and cardiovascular disease. My opinion on that's a little bit different than what you might hear elsewhere. We talk about how important getting the lymphatic system moving is for fat metabolism. We talk about ways to reduce cholesterol by increasing LDL receptor activity, and we talk about how, if you do have high cholesterol, how do you prevent it from oxidizing, which is really what contributes to heart disease. There's a question about bovine colostrum for people with dairy sensitivities that really gets taken in a completely different direction. We talk about this case where this one of the people in the AMA had a client who was reacting to everything. Like the first time she'd eat a food or the first time she'd take a supplement, she'd be fine. But then the second time, all of a sudden it's as if she's allergic to it, and as if everything she puts in her body, she develops an allergy to. So we talk about how do we address that. We talk about heart palpitations as a result of vitamin K2 supplementation and whether increasing your calcium intake could help with that. Electrolytes after a sauna use, what specifically to get for those electrolytes. Can low carb diets cause you to wake up in the middle of the night? Why would a male have low blood levels of calcium? What do we do about low cortisol? What supplements would I recommend for a ketogenic diet? Recommended brands of resveratrol and whether you should not or should take resveratrol. I really kind of take that in the direction of I wouldn't be taking resveratrol, and I explain why. What do we do about SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and H. pylori, an infection in your stomach that can cause ulcers as well as other problems? How do you know if you're getting enough protein? And should you follow the recommendations to use your ketone levels in your blood to know if you're not getting enough protein? Or should you just separate the issues entirely? And if you're on a ketogenic diet, should you just use totally different methods for determining your protein intake that everyone else is making, that everyone else is using? Why you need to be mindful of your iodine if you are taking sulforaphane. What to do about edema, which you could think of more simply as swelling and water retention. What do I think of hair mineral testing and SpectraCell? How to lower your coronary calcium score, and can you bring it down to 0, and should that be your goal? What do I think about magnesium supplements and dosages? What do I think about milk thistle? What would I do for peripheral neuropathy, which is weakness, tingling, pain, and other associated problems in the limbs? And what do I think are the primary factors that prevent you from burning fat? These AMAs I am running at least once a month inside the CMJ Masterpass. I will often run them more than once a month. This month I'm probably going to do them every week. I'm going to play around with the frequency, the length, the number of people allowed into each session. I do limit the seating. Because I want everybody to be able to ask at least one question and get a good answer. I'll be playing around with how many people I'll allow into each session. If you would like to get in on these AMAs, you can sign up for the CMJ Masterpass. And if you would like to get a 10% discount, you can sign up at chrismasterjohnphd.com/masterpass/mastering nutrition. And if you just want to click on the link instead of remembering that, you can click on the link in the description of this episode. That will earn you a 10% lifetime discount. So that is 10% off the price of the program month after month if you sign up for the monthly plan, and year after year if you sign up for the yearly plan. You also get, on top of that, premium features on all my audio video content, including getting things weeks or months before they come out in public, getting transcripts for everything, and getting everything without ads. Speaking of ads, before we get into the actual recording of the AMA, let's hear a word from my sponsors. This episode is brought to you by Ample. Ample is incredible. It's a meal in a bottle that takes a total of 2 minutes to prepare, consume, and clean up. 2 minutes. I'm not kidding. Now, I know what you're thinking. Anything that quick just has to be made of synthetic ingredients that you'd have a hard time pronouncing and wouldn't want to put into your body. But it's not. Ample is made entirely from natural ingredients and designed to provide an optimal balance between protein, fat, and carbs, as well as all the vitamins and minerals that you'd need in a single meal. There's no question that it's always best to sit down and take your time eating a home-cooked meal from fresh ingredients. But let's face it, oftentimes we just don't have time for that. If you live a busy life like I do and your goal is to get things done, you need quality fuel that you can get into your system quickly. Here's a great example where Ample is perfect for me. When I shoot videos, it takes hours to set up and break down all of my equipment. So I try to get as many videos shot in a day as possible. This prevents wasting a lot of time on setup and helps me conserve big blocks of time outside of shooting videos to get into a flow state where I can research something to my heart's content and spend all the time I need thinking about it creatively and analytically. But if I spend hours dealing with recording equipment plus hours spent preparing food, eating it, and cleaning up, there's no time left over to actually shoot any videos. So on recording days, I use Ample to maximize efficiency and focus on getting things done. Ample comes in 3 versions: original, keto, and vegan. And each version comes in 2 portion sizes: 400 calorie and 600 calorie. The 600 calorie original version gives me 37 grams of protein from a mix of grass-fed whey and collagen, which promotes satiety and flips my brain on. Its fat comes from coconut oil and macadamia nut oil. I like these oils because they're low in polyunsaturated fatty acids, or PUFAs, oils that promote aging and are usually loaded into the processed foods that most people eat when they need something on the go. The coconut oil provides some medium-chain fats to keep my energy levels up, too. The carbs, the vitamins, and the minerals all come exclusively from food sources like sweet potatoes, bananas, cocoa powder, wheat and barley grass, and chlorella. It's full of natural prebiotic fibers and probiotics to promote a healthy microbiome, and the gentle sweetness comes from a mix of honey, monk fruit, and stevia. I just mix it with water, drink it, rinse out the bottle, and boom, 2 minutes in, and I'm fully fueled and ready to face the next phase of the day. I first came across Ample when I met its founder and CEO, Connor Young, at PaleoFX a few years ago. Connor inspired me with his vision for Ample, which I anticipate will be much more than a meal in a bottle in the near future. I've become an official advisor to Ample, and I'll be helping Ample design scientific research that will lead both to an ever-improving Ample and I hope meaningful contributions to our understanding of how to use nutrition to help people be healthier and happier and perform better at the challenges that they care most about. As a listener to the Mastering Nutrition podcast, I've also worked out a special deal for you. If you use the discount code CHRIS15, you'll get 15% off your first order of Ample. To get your discount, go to amplemeal.com. That's amplemeal.com, 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 and use the code CHRIS15 at checkout. This episode is brought to you by Ancestral Supplements. Traditional peoples, Native Americans, and early ancestral healers believed that eating the organs from a healthy animal would strengthen and support the health of the corresponding organ of the individual. For example, the traditional way of treating a person with a weak heart was to feed the person the heart of a healthy animal. Modern science makes sense of this. Heart is uniquely rich in coenzyme Q10, which supports heart health. The importance of eating organs, though, is much broader than simply matching the organ you eat to the organ you want to nourish. For example, natives of the Arctic had very limited access to plant foods and got their vitamin C from adrenal glands. And vitamin C is important to far more parts of your body than simply your adrenals. In his epic work, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, Weston Price recorded a story of natives who cured blindness using eyeballs, which are very rich in vitamin A. But now that we understand vitamin A, we know that we can get even more vitamin A by eating liver, making liver good for your eyes. Our ancestors made liberal use of organ meats both to be economical and to utilize their healing and nourishing properties. Animals in the wild do the same. Weston Price had also recorded a story of how the zoos in his era were capturing lions, tigers, and leopards, oh my, only to watch them become infertile in captivity. Researchers then observed what the lions did when they killed zebras in the wild. What they did was they went straight for the organs and bone marrow, leaving the muscle meat behind for the birds. But even the birds took what they could of the organs and bone marrow. Price reported that once the zookeepers started feeding the animals organ meats, boom, their fertility returned. The problem I often encounter, though, is that many people just don't like eating organ meats. Let's face it, if you weren't raised on them, it can be very hard to acquire a taste for them. That is where Ancestral comes in. Ancestral Supplements has a nose-to-tail product line of grass-fed liver, organ meats, living collagen, bone marrow, and more, all in the convenience of a gelatin capsule. For more information or to buy any of their products, go to ancestralsupplements.com. Ancestral Supplements, putting back in what the modern world has left out. So Ellie asks, have you found a calcium powder alternative to the bone meal you had recommended? As per your and my experience, it is hard to consume due to its insolubility. Yeah, so I originally found this through Chris Kresser. Chris and I were talking about it. We were concerned about quality, and we were looking for like the best sourced bone meal powder that we could. And this just looked like the production quality was high. This was, let me look it up. I believe, and actually I think they're sold out now. So it's probably a moot issue anyway. But let's see, I had recommended, where's the link? I had recommended whole bone calcium from Traditional Foods Market. And the thing is, I made this video as I was ordering it, figuring that it was a better product than what I'd been using at the time, which I just bought at Vitamin Shop down the street. And although the sourcing is better, the production quality is not as good, and it's just not as fine, and it's kind of granular, so it's kind of gross. So I had been using cow bone meal powder, and I can't vouch for the sourcing. I can't vouch for the quality of the production, but I can definitely vouch that I'd much rather mix that's KAL, Cal bone meal powder into my food than the traditional Whole Foods market. So I'll have to keep looking to see how to balance the quality of the sourcing with actually liking to consume it in the food. But right now that's on hold. So you can either use that because of the quality of the sourcing, or you can use Cal or another one that you find because it's a finer powder and it's easier to mix into the food. Or you can give up on that approach altogether. Okay. So guys, please don't use the chat to ask questions. Ask questions in the Q&A. It's going to be difficult for me to go back and forth. So an anonymous attendee asks, nutritional causes of low white blood cells and possible solutions. There could be many, but the absolute first thing that I would always think of when I see low white blood cells is copper. I think of copper first. So generally, copper deficiency is at its most sensitive is going to cause neutropenia, which is low neutrophils, but it can cause low white blood cells across the board. I'm not saying there aren't other things, but that's going to be the number one thing that I jump to first when looking for low white blood cells. Solutions, well, I'm not going to assume it's copper. What I'm going to say is, do we have copper here? So the first thing is serum copper or serum ceruloplasmin, which are the two most important markers of copper status, are those included? If not, I'd follow them up. In the meantime, I would say, is this person eating copper-rich foods? So copper-rich foods, the top tier is liver, oysters, shiitake mushrooms, spirulina, and cocoa powder. And then the next tier is basically all other organ meats besides liver, all other mushrooms besides shiitake, all other shellfish besides oysters, and then legumes, potatoes, and a couple other things. I do have that covers the basics, right? So I'm going to look at that. I'm going to say, are there any top tier foods in this person's diet? Are there a lot of second tier foods in this person's diet? If the answer is no to both those questions, then I'm not going to wait on the serum copper and serum ceruloplasmin. I'm just going to say, like, you should try increasing the copper-rich foods in your diet just to start out with, because there's no harm in modifying the foods you eat to make sure there's some copper-rich foods in there. And so you don't really need the testing to do that. But I would definitely get the testing before I would start doing any bigger interventions than that. For example, I'm not going to start that person on copper supplements if I don't have good data backing up copper deficiency. Okay, supplements that may lower anxiety at night before or during sleep and improve heart rate variability during sleep. I don't know enough about the HRV, the heart rate variability, to comment on improving that specifically. I do know that, so in my mind, heart rate variability is largely related to recovery from stress. So I know that Oura Ring tracks heart rate variability during sleep. And then other people track it with other devices in the morning. And generally, the main application that I'm familiar with HRV for is recovery from stress, especially from exercise. And so anything that supports recovery, which mainly is rest, is going to support that. But exercise is going to tank your carbohydrates. So getting enough carbohydrates to support your high intensity exercise is going to be another thing. I do have a friend who's been tracking her HRV with the Oura Ring and with other devices earlier, and basically found that exercise doesn't do anything to her HRV if she eats enough carbs, but has the predictable response of tanking her HRV and then needing recovery time if she doesn't eat enough carbs. So I'm not saying it all comes down to carbs, but that's a big thing, just because the high intensity exercise that's tanking your HRV is tanking your muscular glycogen. And so that's very directly related. But then in general, nutrient density across the board is going to be supportive of recovery, and enough calories is going to be supportive of recovery. Now, lower anxiety
at night before during sleep, I think is a whole different story. That you might have anxiety because you have not recovered well from your exercise. Maybe your cortisol is running high, but it could be for totally different reasons. And that's a giant can of worms that I don't think really can be unpacked in an umbrella answer. I think that's kind of something that needs to be very individualized because it requires 10 or 15 or 20 follow-up questions. But some of the first things that I would think about would be, first of all, what are you doing to psychologically wind down? The fact is that this is not all about nutrition. It's not all about light hygiene. It's also about psychology. So is your anxiety at night driven by overthinking? And if so, what are you overthinking about? Well, if you're ruminating on one thing that you cannot let go of that in your mind, whether it's day or night, then that's probably because your mind is too rigid. It's too stable. And the way that you moisten it up, the way that you make it more flexible and less ruminating, less stuck, is mainly by supporting methylation. And so that comes down to like folate, B12, choline, betaine, and some other B vitamins. And I would say head to chrismasterjohnphd.com/methylation to dig down that rabbit hole. But maybe what you're ruminating on is everything that you need to do the next day, in which case what you really should be doing is making a to-do list of the next day. So I think for people whose brain doesn't shut off at night, you really need a psychological winding down routine. And if you don't have one, then it's probably, you need to look there, because it's like there are people in the world that don't need to psychologically wind down at night, and they're not asking any questions about how to shut their brain off at night because their brain is shut off, right? So if you're asking the question, you need the psychological winding down routine. And I think you start that by thinking about everything that's on your to-do list that's in your head and putting it on paper. You've basically there's a part of your brain that is really scared you're going to forget that thing, and it's keeping it on the loop. And so you take that out, you put it on paper, that part of your brain says, my job is done, the paper's doing my job for me, and it shuts off. And then you might think of something later that, like, maybe you're watching TV and you're like, oh no, I got to do this. I would stop watching TV and I would go write it down, because you don't want to wait till the end of the night to write things down, because then they're in the loop while you're trying to wind down. But at the same time, you don't want to be ideological about the fact that you write your to-do list first, because then if you do think of other things, they're interrupting the rest of what you're doing. So you write everything down, then you transfer into anything that fills your mind with something else. And so fiction is the best way to do that. Things that what you don't want to do is read a book about things that are related to your work or things that are related to fixing your sleep. Like, fixing your sleep is a problem that you need to solve. You want to shut off the problem-solving part of your brain. So the worst thing you could possibly do is be like, I can't sleep, I'm going to go read nutrition blogs about what to eat for not sleeping. You want things that have nothing to do with that. And so I think that TV, movies, video games, and paperback fiction are the best things to do. I would do the paperback fiction last if you have a routine, because I think the active reading can make you sleepy. But at the same time, if you can only read for 20 minutes without your eyes shutting down, you might need 2, 3, or 4 hours for your brain to shut down. So you might need to stack things as watch a movie, play a video game, finish off with a book. And so that's that. And then, there's so many other potential causes of anxiety that you really have to address it on a case-by-case basis. But those are the top things that I think about. Okay, next question is nicotinamide riboside or NMN, nicotinamide mononucleotide, if I remember right, precursors to NAD. These are all different forms of niacin, which supports energy metabolism. Which brands forms are most likely to work and dosage recommendations? I am going to research this intensively in the next week, because next week I'm recording my long form podcast on niacin. And so I'm going to give you a short answer now, and I will give you a much longer answer next week. The short answer is I don't know that much at this moment. So I know that NAD, you got to inject it if you want it bioavailable. Ben Greenfield does that. I probably will never do that. But if you do want high bioavailability, I believe you have to inject it. Nicotinamide riboside, I think the difference between NR and NMN is primarily whether it gets into the brain. And I don't want to go into more detail because I really want to research this myself before I say anything about it. In terms of brands, I have no comment on brands at this time. I might have a comment on brands next week. I would say that if you haven't seen what I've already published on niacin, high doses of any kind of niacin have the potential side effect of sapping your methyl group supply. So I think it's very important to say for every milligram of niacin, I'm going to take a milligram of a methyl donor. My preferred methyl donor would be trimethylglycine or TMG in this case. But in terms of a better answer to your question, I'll have more detail next week. Ellie again says, oh no, we answered that. So, okay, I see. If I answer these live, I click answer live. All right. Sorry about that, guys. Done. Okay, here we got it cleaned up. Dosage recommendations for berberine when used to lower cholesterol as an inhibitor of the enzyme PCSK9. I cannot answer this question right now because I have not looked into the dosing of berberine, so I don't know. But I'll put it in the list for things to research in the future. An anonymous attendee says supplements that increase deep sleep. Okay, so someone in the chat suggests 250 milligrams of berberine, but I can't comment on that. Okay, supplements that may increase deep sleep. So deep sleep is primarily what's going on in deep sleep is that all of your biogenic amines, which are most of the neurotransmitters that you make from protein, with the possible, like depending on how you classify it, you could say ultimately you make melatonin from protein, but it's not a biogenic amine. So the biogenic amines, which are the catecholamines, they're histamine, et cetera, those all are basically shut off. Like they're probably not zero, but they're almost zero during sleep. And acetylcholine is also shut down during deep sleep, but it pops up during REM sleep. So to me, I really don't think this is a supplement issue. I think, first of all, you definitely don't want to be taking anything that has acetylcholinesterase inhibitors at night. Non-organic foods have pesticides that are acetylcholinesterase inhibitors. I don't know if that's relevant here dose-wise. Things that improve cognitive function are often acetylcholinesterase inhibitors. So ginkgo biloba is one. I wouldn't take that at night. There are drugs that treat a lot of neurological problems, especially Alzheimer's, that are acetylcholinesterase inhibitors. I wouldn't take those at night. So I think that's relevant. I'm on the fence about whether you should take choline at night. So I think probably it's fine to eat eggs at night. If you're taking something like alpha GPC, I'm not sure. You might want to avoid that at night particularly if you find that when you're tracking your sleep with an Oura ring, your REM is higher than normal and your deep sleep is lower than normal. But other than that, I would say that methylation support is very important to help lower some of the important biogenic amines. So histamine, for example, is primarily gotten rid of with methylation in the brain. And if your histamine levels are high, that's during the day, it might cause anxiety. During the night, if they're even, if they're not shut off, then that could interfere with your deep sleep. And then your electrolytes are super important. So calcium and magnesium, salt, and potassium, all these things you need to get straight in order for your sleep cycle to be working right. Other than that, I don't know. If maybe if your cortisol is high at night, or your or other factors in anxiety are high at night, you might want a targeted supplement there, like phosphatidylserine, for example, has been used to. The evidence is conflicting, but has been used to lower the stress response. Some people use that for nighttime cortisol, but I think it's I don't think it's a blanket answer to that question. I think it's like figuring out what's the cause of the low deep sleep and working from there. Okay, so CBD oil, an anonymous attendee says, CBD oil, which brands or forms are most likely to work, and dosage recommendations? I don't know anything about CBD oil right now. I'll put it on the list. Anonymous attendee says, probiotics brand and cycling recommendations. Should you change probiotics every quarter or not? I don't know. I really have no idea. This is not my area, but I will guess on this because I think I do have some, someone might call me out on this who knows more than me, but probiotics, I think probiotics are very individualized. So some people, I think there's very much a trial and error thing. So for me, for example, Saccharomyces boulardii is extremely important, but I know that based on my response to trying different probiotics, and that's not true for other people. There are some probiotics that increase your transit time and some that decrease your transit time. So whether you have fast or slow transit time would need to be individualized. I'm not an expert on this. I haven't really done the research on it. In terms of cycling, I don't know. It's my guess that you probably need to individualize more than you need to cycle. My experience has been the stuff that works for me until I stop taking it because I think I don't need it anymore. And then it takes a long time for the effects to start reversing. But then when I put that thing back in, I get the positive experiences that I had before. So in my trial and error experience, cycling seems to be misguided, but I'll leave it to someone who knows the gut better than I do to give a better answer to that. Anonymous says, is theracumin as effective as Mariva curcumin for arthritis? I have no idea. I'm sorry, but I'll put that on the list to look in at another time. Anonymous attendee says, recommended potassium supplements to get 3,000 to 4,000 milligrams per day. Well, I highly recommend that you get potassium from food if you can. And there's two reasons for that. One is that when you're taking a potassium supplement, you can cause low blood sugar if you don't have some glucose that goes along with it. Sorry, my mic fell. Even in vegetables, you're getting a little bit of glucose that goes along with the potassium. Okay. Sorry about that. So potassium, even in vegetables, like if you eat a vegetable, you're getting a very slow leak of potassium into your system, and you're getting a very slow leak of glucose into your system, and you're not going to have like this big jolt of potassium that can lower your blood sugar, both because it's going into your system slowly and because it's matched by a slow drip of glucose. You also you're not going to cause hypercholemia, which can land you in the hospital, because even if you have something wrong with your kidneys getting rid of potassium, then it doesn't matter because the food is digested so slowly, the potassium drips into your system very slowly, so it's safe. If you're taking a potassium supplement, I made a video on this. I think the best thing to do is to mix the potassium supplement into your food to mimic that effect. Because the other thing is, if you take a potassium supplement that is in a pill, for example, especially if it's time release, it can sit in your stomach and it can erode your stomach lining before it gets a chance to distribute out. You don't have that problem with food because the potassium is distributed in the food already. So I think you want to mimic that if you supplement by mixing the potassium into your food. And then it's a matter of whether you like the taste of it or not. This is sort of the same thing with the calcium powder. Like if it's too granular, it's gross, right? But I would prefer to mix potassium citrate into the food. That has kind of a sour taste, but there's a certain percentage of the population that just hates the taste of potassium citrate, and maybe it doesn't go with your food if you do that. So, if that's the case, you could use potassium. You could use potassium bicarbonate. I don't like the idea of mixing it with your food though, because I think the bicarbonate could hurt your digestion. You could use potassium chloride. The chloride, it's just that the reason I don't like potassium chloride is because one of the things you want from in your diet, there's salt, and then there's the plant-based potassium that comes along with other organic molecules that are kind of on potassium's side of the equation. And sodium and chloride raise your blood pressure. Sodium and chloride are acidifying. Potassium and all the things that go along with potassium in fruits and vegetables lower your blood pressure and are alkalinizing. And so if you're taking potassium chloride, it's like you're getting half of the effect of the potassium with half of the effect of the salt. That's fine if you're replacing salt with potassium chloride. It's just that it's kind of you're shooting yourself in the foot if you are trying to get the potassium to balance the salt in your diet because you're not getting enough plant-based potassium. So the other thing is digestive problems from potassium supplements have primarily been shown with potassium chloride. So I just don't like that as well. So potassium citrate is best if you can handle it. It's best to mix it with your food if you can. If you're going to take grams of potassium a day, you should tell your doctor about it just in case you're on a medication or you have some potential problem that can interfere with your kidney's ability to get the potassium out, or just so if something happens, they know you were taking it. Not that the risk is high if you don't have a known medical problem, you're not on many medications, the risk is really low. I'd still tell your doctor about it just in case. But look, it's best to get potassium from food, and that basically means the lean portions of your animal foods, fruits and vegetables, and that's it, right? So your options are eat 5 to 9 servings of fruits and vegetables a day, like the government says, or skip your fruits and vegetables, but eat pretty low fat. So you're getting egg whites. Like I don't usually recommend egg whites without the yolk, but that's where the potassium is primarily. Low fat milk. I don't usually recommend low fat milk, but look, if you're not eating your fruits and vegetables, it's the lean portion of the milk that has the potassium. If you eat low fat milk, you're going to get twice as much potassium per calorie as full fat milk. Lean portions of meats have a significant amount of potassium if you cook them in a way that it doesn't remove the juices. And then if you eat whole grains have a little bit, legumes and potatoes have quite a lot. So you can eat a lot of those if you're not going to eat fruits and vegetables. So it's basically, you take your pick between those two approaches. All right. Okay, that one's done. So Anonymous says, what do you think is the best clinical way to monitor COMT function if you have already tested for SNPs? Symptoms. So COMT is primarily, so if you are doing hormone tests on the Dutch test, which is dutchtest.com, it's a dried urine hormone testing platform, they have a methylation index that is based on the methylation of estrogen. So that's one way you could look at that. But symptom-wise, the main significance of COM, and that's related to like long-term risk of estrogen-related cancers, for example. Acute symptoms are primarily going to manifest in the brain in the relation between COMT and dopamine. And what it's doing there is the higher your COMT activity, the more flexible your brain, the lower your COMT activity, the more rigid your brain. And if your nutrition is straight and you don't have a psychological disorder, that's just a personality trait. So high COMT activity, you worry less, meaning worry, W-O-R-R-Y, so you're concerned about things less. And they call this the warrior, W-O-R-R-Y, warrior, W-A-R-R-I-O-R phenotype, right? So high COMT activity, you don't worry as much. You're like a warrior because you just pick your battle, you defeat. You pick your battle, defeat, pick your battle, defeat, pick your battle, defeat. If you are a low COMT activity, you're not a warrior, you're a worrier. So you are like, oh no, what's going to happen tomorrow? Oh no, what's going to happen tomorrow? Oh no, I can't do anything. What's going to happen tomorrow? But, but like that's the extremes. Within most of the population, it's just a personality trait. Like, am I going to focus on one thing? If so, I'm probably going to do better at my schoolwork because it's going to be easier for me to spend a lot of hours studying. Maybe I'm going to be successful at making this really big project. On the other hand, like maybe your job requires 800 quick decisions a day. Like maybe you're going to be the next Jeff Bezos if you're, way on the decision, make it. So you really look at like, how is your mind operating? If your mind's getting stuck on stuff, low COMT. If your mind is racing around to different things, high COMT. If that's just your personality, don't worry about it. But if you're on the poles over here and it's starting to interfere with your life, then that's where it matters. And so nutritionally, low COMT methyl donors, high COMT methyl buffers, glycine. So like methyl donors, B12, folate, choline, betaine, some of the other assisting B vitamins, methyl buffer, glycine, right? And then that's overlaid on your genetic predisposition. The nutrition is overlaid on your genetic predisposition. And that's how I would look at that. I don't think that I wouldn't be using a blood test or a urine test for that. Although you probably would see a correlation with the Dutch methylation index with those symptoms if the COMT in your liver and your brain is doing the same thing. Okay, Scott Habermel says, how would you address normal TSH but low T4? The first thing I'd do is I'd look at your T3. So for those of you who aren't familiar with thyroid hormones, so TSH tells your thyroid to make thyroid hormone. T4 is the precursor. T3 is the active hormone. So your T4. So if your TSH is normal, that means that your thyroid gland is receiving the proper messages from your pituitary. But if your T4 is low, I would look, first of all, is your T3 normal or high? So if your T3 is high, then you're probably just converting it very rapidly. If your T3 is low, then you are not, then even though your pituitary appears to be receiving the right signals, you're not making enough thyroid hormone. And in fact, it would become unclear whether your pituitary is actually making the right signals, because if your T4 and your T3 are low, your TSH should be high, because your pituitary should be saying, wait a second, T4 and T3 are low, so I need to make more of the message TSH to tell the thyroid gland to kick into gear. So if the T4 and T3 are both on the lowish side and the TSH is normal, I would reinterpret the TSH and say, actually, your TSH is not as high as it should be given your thyroid hormones. And so I would then look to the pituitary. In terms of nutritional issues, I think the big things that you're looking at are calories, carbohydrate, and body fat, because the pituitary is overwhelmingly asking the question, do I have enough energy in the short term and the long term to engage in the health promoting long-term investments that thyroid hormone governs? And those are many, like all the biological peacocking, like making nice hair and making nice skin and making things look nice. But they're also like protecting your tissues from damage. And then the big thing, if you're in the right age bracket, is fertility. So if your pituitary is not making as much TSH as it should, then that's basically saying your brain perceives that you don't have enough energy on hand. And that means you're either your body fat's too low, or your calories are too low, or your carbs are too low, because those are the big signals that your brain's going to use. And then I would say, I mentioned in the nutrition and neuroscience series, I mentioned that all of the releasing hormones, so all of the things that the brain is making to govern the endocrine system, all of them require copper, vitamin C, zinc, and glycine to make. So I think the big thing to look at is body fat, calories, and carbs. But the next layer to peel back would be those four, vitamin C and copper, especially in the background, zinc and glycine. And I would especially look at those if the big picture incorporates all the other things you expect from those nutrients being missing in the brain. And that's like, it's not just low thyroid, it's low thyroid paralleled with low adrenal, low sex hormones. So across the board, if that's true, yes. And then also, if your appetite is dysregulated, you're eating too much, if your hair is graying, if you're peeing too much, and I might be missing a couple things in there. But if that general picture starts to look like that, that's when I start saying maybe these nutrients are missing in the brain. But always, first thing is carbs, calories, and body fat. Kristen Krozek says, I have familial hypercholesterolemia as well as a mutation in my Lp(a). I listened to your 2016 podcast regarding FH and have implemented a low-fat diet and am in the process of fixing thyroid issues. My question is, can you please further explain whether I should be more concerned about overall fat or saturated fat intake? Okay, so just to be clear, I'm not treating anyone here. I'm not a medical practitioner, so I am not treating the disease of familial hypercholesterolemia, and this is just educational in nature. But as a general principle, if I'm thinking about familial hypercholesterolemia and I'm thinking about overall fat or saturated fat, I would be thinking more about saturated fat, but I would be testing it. So first of all, it depends on the specific saturated fatty acid, but saturated fat relative to other fats raises cholesterol levels. There are people that dispute that, but the data are super, super clear. That does not mean that everyone should lower their saturated fat intake, because most people can accommodate that, right? Because most people have a working system to regulate the cholesterol levels. The thing is, with the familial hypercholesterolemia, that system is broken. So you become hypersensitive to all the things that do have some effect. So you will be hypersensitive to the fact that saturated fat raises cholesterol levels more than other fats do. But I think it's more to the root of the problem based on how these things regulate LDL receptor activity, which is what clears cholesterol from your blood and which is what is broken in FH, familial hypercholesterolemia. I think a lower fat, higher carbohydrate diet is more relevant to the root mechanism. But what you do is you test this, right? So standard lipid panels are dirt cheap, and it is not hard to convince your doctor to order them, right? So you just, if you're like, you don't need to get fancy. You don't need the NMR and all that other stuff. I'm not saying it doesn't have its place, but if you want to do dietary tests to see what are the big factors affecting you, you just run these tests every couple of months and you pick a diet to go on and stay on it for 4 to 8 weeks and then see what the results are, right? So you do the low-fat diet where most of your fat comes from coconut, which is the Katavan diet, where they don't have heart disease. And you try that for 4 or 8 weeks and you look at your cholesterol levels. Then you do the low-fat diet where most of your fat comes from olive oil, which is a more Mediterranean approach. And you see what that does to your cholesterol levels. So you then tailor it to your own response, because I can predict what will generally happen, but the individual person is going to have so many different genetic and other factors that influence what they're responsive to, that they just need to test it out. Helen Donnell says, your post on urine pH and exercise tolerance was a game changer for me. But anytime I miss a dose of bicarb, I'm right back to 5. Any long-term concerns with taking bicarb 2 to 3 times a day? Any suggestions for other ways to get my system pH up? Well, I will say in my case that I stopped taking the bicarbonate when I figured out that I had a zinc deficiency. So for me, for people who don't know the backstory here, and if you Google Masterjohn urine pH, and you'll probably get that blog post to come up. It's called how normalizing my urine pH helped me love working out again, or something like that. The backstory in brief is when I was going through the mold and barium toxicity crisis of turn of 2016 into 2017. I got to the point where even after I was very on the way to recovery, I still could only work out once every 5 days. And that was because, when I was in the midst of the crisis, I couldn't work out at all. When I was at this point, I could work out, but then I'd be like floored for, I'd lay in bed for hours and I wouldn't have number one, the energy to go back to working out till 5 days later, but also I couldn't afford to be laid out in bed for 3 hours every day of the week or every other day. Like I could only afford that time once every 5 days as well. And so what happened was I realized, in looking at some lab tests, that a Genova ion panel had some findings that suggested pH imbalance problems. And that was based on the only thing abnormal in my ion profile was that my glutamine to glutamate ratio was really screwed up. And let's see, the glutamate was really high and the glutamine was really low because of the kidney freeing ammonia by breaking down the glutamine and turning into glutamate to make ammonia that would balance the acidity. So I looked at that and I said, that sounds like a pH issue. And I was talking with a friend of mine where that led down the same rabbit hole, and I put 2 and 2 together and I thought, okay, maybe the reason the workout is tanking me is because of all the lactic acid and my system can't handle the lactic acid. So I started measuring my urine pH, and the urine pH was very, very low. Like it was way less than 5. I had to get different strips that go down further to see where it actually was. And it was staying there for a long time. So when I started the bicarbonate dosing, I was taking a 1/4 teaspoon at a time. And my first workout, I was totally laid out. And I'd take a dose of bicarbonate, then I'd get up out of bed and I'd go pee and I'd measure my urine pH again, and it wasn't going anywhere. I just laid back down, get up, take bicarbonate, pee, lay down, get up, take bicarbonate, pee. Like it just wasn't going anywhere until at some point, all of a sudden I shot up out of bed and I was like, I want to work. I felt amazing. I went and measured my urine pH and it was 6. So it was like it just went nowhere until I got enough bicarbonate in that it crossed the threshold, getting into 6. And all of a sudden I felt amazing. That was the first big clue. And then I replicated things over time and found that it was a consistent effect. So I took bicarbonate consistently to match the dosing and frequency that would keep my urine pH, except for first time waking up in the morning, between 6.4 and 6.8. So that meant taking some every day on rest days and taking more during workouts by doubling up a dose before I worked out and then following it up and so on. What turned things around for me was when I realized that my zinc was low. And that was because when I started putting on muscle mass, so basically the bicarbonate allowed me to work out more. Working out more allowed me to gain muscle. Gaining muscle made me get patches of dry skin. Well, what do patches of dry skin mean? Well, first of all, patches of dry skin are the earliest sign of zinc deficiency, an experimental zinc deficiency. Like when they lock volunteers up and give them a zinc deficient diet and just watch what happens, early patches of dry skin are the most common early symptom. Well, what does working out do to your zinc needs? It increases it because every pound of muscle mass that you put on requires X amount of milligrams of zinc extra to sustain, because you're making new tissue and you have to keep the zinc concentration of the tissue standardized across your body. And what does zinc do to pH balance? Well, zinc is a cofactor for carbonic anhydrase, which is one of the main enzymes in regulating pH. As soon as I started, so I saw this, I started supplementing zinc immediately. Then I went and tested my plasma zinc within 3 days. And even though I'd been taking zinc for 3 days, my plasma zinc was still borderline at the level that I associate with deficiency, which it was around 70. And that confirmed for me that I was even more zinc deficient 3 days earlier. And once I started supplementing zinc, the pH problems went away. So zinc is a big one that I would look at. I'm not saying that there are others, but I would definitely, look at zinc. And if zinc doesn't work, I'd just keep going down the rabbit hole and try to do a comprehensive analysis like the kind that I do with testing nutritional status, the ultimate cheat sheet. Harms of bicarb, well, alkalinizing the stomach is the big one. So you definitely want to take it as far away from food as possible. And I do think that chronic use, the biggest potential problem is going to be alkalinizing the stomach. And that's going to mean lower ability to kill pathogens in the stomach. So greater potential for overgrowth of bacteria in the stomach or in the small intestine. And it's going to mean less efficient digestion of your food. So I think, again, the number one thing you can do is take it as far away from food as possible. But I do think that you don't want to be stuck on taking bicarbonate all the time, every day, forever. I would feel more comfortable about it, using it as a bridge to get from point A to point B, and fixing the underlying regulatory problems as the destination. Ellie says, could magnesium hydroxide be absorbed via skin? I don't know. I genuinely don't know. I've been applying milk of magnesia as a deodorant alternative in spray form for a few years now, and it works well, but I'm concerned about I might be hypermagnesiemic as I'm having low pulse, low blood pressure, and frequent bowel movements. Okay, yeah, you might be hypermagnesiemic. You should measure your magnesium status for sure. Merrick says, LPA and genetic component with relation to cholesterol and risk of cardiovascular disease. Merrick, I get that you want me to riff on this, but I'm going to give better answers to questions if they're more specific. So LP little a genetic component related to CVD risk. Everyone out there is thinking that LP little a causes heart disease. I don't believe it. I don't believe it because I think it's very possible that the function of LP little a is to clean up oxidized LDL particles. And it is that it might have other roles, but that's one of them. And so I think LP little a is a marker for oxidized LDL particles, but it's also the case that some people just make a lot of it genetically. And so if you make a lot of it genetically and it causes heart disease, then the genetic component causes heart disease. But if the genetic component just makes you make more, and if the reason it correlates with heart disease is because having a lot of oxidized LDL also makes you make more because it cleans up the oxidized LDL, then the genetic component doesn't cause heart disease. So if anyone wants to send me data after that to look at to revise my view, I'll do that. And actually, I'm going to be recording with Peter Attia, so I'll probably brush up on that before I go on there because I know he likes to talk about that stuff. So I might change my viewpoint in the future, but that's my viewpoint right now. Anonymous says, I'm curious about the role of the lymphatic system in fat metabolism, specifically in high-fat, low-carb diets. Is there a biochemical explanation for why improving lymphatic circulation would improve fat metabolism? Well, I wouldn't call it biochemical. I'd call it physiological, but yes. Fat goes from your gut through your lymphatic system to your blood. And if your lymphatic circulation is not good, neither is the delivery of your fat to anything in your body. It's as simple as that. You don't digest, you don't move fat from your, so everything that's not fat, as well as fatty acids that are 10 or fewer carbons in length, like you get from MCT oil and in smaller amounts from coconut oil and butter, those go through the portal vein to the liver. The liver handles it and then it goes to the circulation. All fat besides that stuff goes gut, lymph, general circulation. All your tissues get first dibs, then it goes to the liver. If your lymphatic system is slow, so is your delivery of fat to every organ in your body. Lawrence Tam says, my LDL-C is consistently high. It was 3.9 millimoles per liter 3 days ago. Total cholesterol was 6.2 millimoles per liter. Trigs 1.4, HDL 1.7. How do I avoid having a large amount of oxidized LDL particles in my blood? Lawrence, I'm not treating anyone here. I'm not a doctor, so I'm going to answer your question more generally, which is, so I like the general version of this question is, if your cholesterol is high, how do you avoid having a large burden of oxidized LDL? The first answer to that is get your cholesterol normal. Now, I'm not saying that high cholesterol is the cause of heart disease. It's not. Oxidized LDL is. But the number one cause of high cholesterol is not clearing it from the blood. And the number one cause of LDL oxidizing is not clearing it from the blood. So I would never skip over the question of what can I do to get the cholesterol in the normal range first. I think the boundaries of what the normal range is are a little exaggerated. So if you look at traditional cultures that eat a traditional diet, live a traditional lifestyle, they're not modernized, and they don't have heart disease, you do see cholesterol levels that go higher than ours. So for a man, maybe going up to 220 in total cholesterol is pretty normal. These are milligrams per deciliter. I'm sorry, but I do not think of, my brain cannot compute millimoles per liter off the top of my head in cholesterol right now. So I apologize for that. But for a man, up to 220. For a woman in her 40s and 50s, up to 250 maybe. I'm not looking at those to change if lifestyle and diet are ancestral, and if everything else about the data make it look like that person's very healthy, especially if direct data of carotid IMT, intimate media thickness, or coronary calcium score, which are direct measures of the actual burden of plaque development. If those are normal and all the metabolic markers are normal and the lifestyle and diet is normal, I wouldn't be thinking about fixing the cholesterol at that point. But for someone whose cholesterol is like 300, you don't even see that in Tokalau, where the saturated fat content and the traditional cholesterol levels are the highest ever recorded in an ancestral population in the entire globe. You don't see that. So that, when they're that high, that you just have to fix it as your first line of defense. And that means improving LDL receptor activity. Usually, I did a short Chris Masterjohn light episode and a long form one on this. If you do Google Masterjohn high cholesterol, you'll probably find it. But the big things to look at are body composition, inflammation, fiber intake. So higher fiber, better generally. And thyroid. Those are the really big things to look at. And then, so definitely look at those things first. But the question is, like, let's say you haven't brought the cholesterol down. What do you do to protect it? Well, that largely comes down to a few things. So imagine the lipoprotein leaves the liver. Eventually, some is LDL, some is VLDL, both of which wind up being LDL at some point. It leaves the liver packaged with antioxidants. Those include vitamin E, they include coenzyme Q10. Those are probably the two big ones, but they include others, and just so many antioxidants are important there. But then when it's circulating in the blood, it gets behind the arterial wall, and that's the main site of oxidation. So the question is, how oxidizing of an environment is that? Also, it gets stuck behind the arterial wall. So the question is, how sticky of an environment it is. Because if it gets stuck in the oxidizing environment of behind the arterial wall, then that's the very powerful regulator of whether it's going to oxidize. So the stickiness, probably the dietary approach that best regulates the stickiness is manganese. Manganese is found mostly in plant foods, and vegetarians have the highest intakes. People with plant-rich diets that also eat animal foods are in the middle, and people who eat a lot of animal foods and no plants are at the bottom. So eat a lot of plant foods is one thing. There are some animal experiments specifically with blueberries as a source of manganese, showing in animals that it makes the arterial wall less sticky. So there's that. And then the oxidizing environment, a big part of that is inflammation, because if you have systemic inflammation, then you make the inflammation causes oxidative stress. So, that comes back, like, you should have been looking at inflammation for high cholesterol in the first place. So you assume you have that covered. And then antioxidant defense in general. Antioxidant system is so, as a CMJ Masterpass holder, you have access to the premium features on the antioxidant system. So check out that if you want to really dive down this rabbit hole. But the antioxidant system is, or if you want the short answer, the Testing Nutritional Status Ultimate Cheat Sheet has a whole section on antioxidant related nutrients. But it's a gigantic question. You're looking at protein, you're looking at selenium, you're looking at zinc, copper, iron, manganese, you're looking at vitamin C, vitamin E, you're looking at protein, glycine. You're looking at so many things in there. So you really got to figure out what the weakest link is in that person and focus on that weakest link. There may be many. Carol Matt says, bovine colostrum from New Zealand cows. Yay or nay for those with dairy sensitivities? If nay, what would you recommend instead? Carol, what is your goal? If you can, Carol, if you want to make this more specific in the chat, put it write a little about what you're taking it for. So I don't know. I mean, I would say it's suspect if you have if you have a dairy sensitivity, if this is immunological in nature, your problem could be with casein. It could be with the whey proteins. It could be with something more specific. It could be with specific antibodies. It's very complicated. And so you're less likely to tolerate colostrum if you have a known dairy sensitivity, but you can't really know without testing the colostrum. So you test it. And then, let's see, Carol says in the chat, to settle a client's overactive immune system down. Well, Carol, how is the overactive in the chat, or let me know if you'd rather come on board so we can talk about this back and forth. But like, what specifically about the overactive immune system are we looking at? So I would think like maybe this is chronic inflammation that's not resolving, and then I'm thinking more about arachidonic acid, DHA. So this is food sensitivities. This client reacts to everything. Okay, so if that means like food sensitivities across the board, then I don't think of that as an overactive. She can take a supplement one time and then the next time it throws her over. Same with food. Okay, that I might be wrong, but that sounds to me like an oral tolerance issue. So, you put something in your mouth, it goes to your gut, and then your immune system decides whether it's safe or whether it's not safe. And the way that it decides that, first of all, it doesn't know anything when you're born. Okay? Your immune system is more or less a blank slate when you're born. Now, you do have predispositions because you have genetics that impact categories of protein fragments that you have the potential to make a decision about, but you are not ever born having a tolerance or intolerance to something. You are born with very broad genetics that say, I will make decisions about this category. I can't recognize this category. I will just make decisions about this category, right? So you eat food and your or take supplements, right? You put something in your mouth, you swallow it. In your gut, your immune system says, this might be something important. I'm going to take it back to my home base and I'm going to decide what to do about it. So that home base is called the gut-associated lymphoid tissue, or GALT. And the immune system deliberately takes, this is the good kind of leaky gut, right? So your immune system is deliberately taking things into that lymph tissue, purposefully taking fragments that are not completely digested for the purpose of making decisions about it. In the gut, how does it make that decision? Overwhelmingly, there are two pro-tolerance factors. They are prostaglandin E2, which is made from arachidonic acid, the omega-6 fatty acid that's found most abundantly in egg yolks and liver. And that is the direct target of anti-inflammatory drugs, as well as high doses of EPA from fish oil, and probably a lot of herbal anti-inflammatories. I will have to research this more, but right now I would say herbal anti-inflammatories I would put as a potential, depending on their mechanism of action, I'd put them as a potential problem here. But absolutely the NSAIDs, the non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, and probably acetaminophen, which technically is not an NSAID, but does behave like this. And possibly aspirin. So aspirin is in a very gray area here, because although aspirin does not share the properties of other NSAIDs that would predispose to chronic inflammation, it will lower prostaglandin E2, and prostaglandin E2 is critical for oral tolerance in the gut. So I would target any potential anti-inflammatory in there as a potential contributor to this. So you need prostaglandin E2, made from COX-2, from arachidonic acid, made from everything that everyone believes is inflammatory. All the anti-inflammatory drugs, all the zone diet was almost everything written about inflammation says prostaglandin E2 is inflammatory. It is one of the two central causes of oral tolerance, of the immune system recognizing as something that is safe. The other is retinoic acid made from vitamin A. So to create a pro-tolerance environment, you want no COX inhibitors being taken. you want sufficient arachidonic acid in the diet, and you want sufficient vitamin A in the diet. Then, what are the factors that tell the immune system this is not safe? And that is tissue damage. So the immune system is basically just like saying, I will make a decision about this. To make this decision, I need data. So what are the data that things are okay? Retinoic acid, prostaglandin E2. What are the data that say this is not okay? All the factors released during tissue damage, because tissue damage is the number one sign that something is harmful. You know, like you can relate to this, right? Like if you see someone by your house that you don't know, and you see that the window is broken, you're like, that dude is probably a burglar. I'm not going to go say hi. I'm going to call the cops. But if you see someone next to your house that you don't know, and they're wearing a suit and tie, and they have pamphlets, you're probably going to say, that person's a Jehovah's Witness. I don't know if I want to let them in, but I bet they're nice people, and you're probably not going to be afraid. Or depending on your predisposition, you may say, I want to become a Jehovah's Witness today, or I want to engage in a theological debate with the Jehovah's Witnesses and invite them in for coffee, which is what my grandfather always did. But you make those decisions based on the symbols that you see around. Your immune system does the exact same thing. So if someone is, like you talk about this person, the thing comes in and they're fine, then the next time they take it, they don't tolerate it. That sounds like they are programmed to decide that everything that comes in is a threat. And so they take it and it gets into their system and it doesn't do anything. But meanwhile, the immune system took a piece of that into the gut-associated lymphoid tissue and said, we need to program to make an army against this threat. And so it's the second time that they took it that they have the reaction. And so that means, again, arachidonic acid, get the arachidonic acid, get rid of the anti-inflammatories, get the retinoic acid from the vitamin A, and thoroughly investigate any possible sources of tissue damage in the gut. I don't know if it's necessarily the gut. It could be tissue damage somewhere else that then the thing circulate into the gut, but it's probably the gut because that's what's closest to the situation. So those are the things that I would be looking at. Ellie says vitamin K2, MK4, and MK7 might have caused prolonged heart palpitations. Upon stopping it, symptoms mostly resolved after a week or so. Can that mean that the body is better off without it? Might increasing calcium intake mitigate this? And then there's a link. Okay, I can't look at the link now because there's the number of questions in the Q&A goes up, not down over time. So I would say the calcium is really interesting. I genuinely hadn't thought of that until you mentioned it. Even though I've heard other people ask this question, I haven't had time to look into it. But you raise a good point. So it is conceivable, for example, that your bone density has been very low because you have not had the K2 you needed to get the minerals into the bone. And so when you get the K2, you start loading the calcium into the bone, but maybe because your system, your whole body is programmed to assume things were the way they were before you started taking the K2, that it doesn't adapt fast enough to normalize your blood calcium, which, by the way, how do you normalize your blood calcium? You take calcium out of the bone. So if you have something making calcium go into the bone, oh, by the way, depending on the dose, right? So MK4 has been studied in high milligram doses as an osteoporosis drug because it inhibits bone resorption. If you inhibit bone resorption, you will definitely interfere with your ability to maintain normal serum calcium levels because bone resorption is how you do that. So either you're giving the nutrients needed to get the calcium into the bone and the body is just prioritizing that because it's been missing them for so long and your serum calcium drops, or you're actually creating signaling stopping bone resorption. and so your blood calcium drops because of that. Either way, taking calcium might impact that. And I would love to have some anecdotal data on that because there's no studies on K2 and heart palpitations. There's just a bunch of anecdotes. So I would love it if we had some anecdotes of people saying whether the calcium helps, especially since so much of the K2 stuff is so skeptical of calcium. Kate Ream Blue's book, Vitamin K2 and the Calcium Paradox, I think it's a great book. Basically what that book is an enormous elaboration of my 2007 article on Activator X and Weston Price. But if I had written that book, I would have done things a little bit differently. I think the whole idea of the calcium paradox that's in the title is, I think it has merit. There is some data indicating that calcium supplements might worsen the risk of heart disease, but I think that the conclusions are I think they're way too anti-calcium. And I think there's too many people out there taking K2 who have it in their heads that calcium supplements are bad. And look, calcium supplements are bad compared to getting enough calcium from food, but a huge portion of those people are not getting enough calcium from food, and getting calcium is more important than where it comes from. I genuinely believe that. Okay. Anonymous says, which brand and dosage of no-carb electrolytes would you take at night to optimize sleep, especially after sauna use? I would drink a bottle of Gerolsteiner, and I would add to it 100 milligrams of magnesium citrate and of any kind of magnesium, citrate, glycinate, malate, those three are fine. And I would add to it 400 milligrams of potassium citrate or bicarbonate if it's an empty stomach. You say no carb because of the potassium. I personally would take maybe a teaspoon of honey with this. And I would take a handful of salt. And by handful, I don't mean a giant handful, but I mean a lump. Like maybe let's say a half a teaspoon to a teaspoon of salt with it, providing that you don't do this if you have high blood pressure and you either A, know that you're sodium sensitive, or B, don't know if you're sodium sensitive. Don't go overboard on the salt. But if you know you don't have a problem with salt and blood pressure, then I would add like a half a teaspoon of salt to that mix. Lawrence Tam says, I keep waking up in the middle of the night and keep awoken for hours before I give up and get off my bed. Would low carb, say 50 grams, make it worse? My blood glucose was 6 3 days ago, which was too high. I like to try low carb. And he clarifies that that's 110 milligrams per deciliter. I keep waking up in the middle of the night and stay awake for hours. Would low carb make it worse? Lawrence, if you are in the chat, can you just clarify whether you are already on the low carb diet of 50 grams per day? Yeah, definitely could. So look, if you're on a ketogenic diet, let's say you're not on a ketogenic diet. Your brain will consume 120 grams of carbohydrate every day. Just your brain. There's gotta be another 30 grams or so that would be used no matter what, obligately by red blood cells, certain cells in the testes and the kidney and the lens of the eye. And then the rest of your body, if you're eating not a ketogenic diet, the rest of your body's not really trying to be a fat burner. So it's going to burn through carbohydrate that could have been replaced by fat, but it wasn't because you had carbohydrate there. And so your liver stores about 90 grams of carbohydrate to be able to stabilize your blood sugar between meals. And And overnight is the biggest time where it has to do that, because overnight is the longest period of time that you don't go without meals. So, you add that up, you're looking at like 250 grams of carbohydrate a day we haven't gone to high intensity exercise yet. Like you're looking at, if you want to keep your glycogen stores replete, you're probably looking at 250 grams of carbs a day. Now you go on a ketogenic diet, what happens? Well, your brain glucose consumption goes down from 120 grams a day to like 30 or 35 grams a day. It cannot and will not ever go to zero. Okay, so there's one thing. You still have another 20, 30 grams of carbohydrate that you're burning through by cells that cannot burn anything else, like red blood cells, certain cells in the kidney, certain cells in the testes, certain cells in the lens of the eye. So you still have a minimum 60 or 70 grams of carbs per day that you need, even when you're maximally keto adapted. I'm not saying you need to eat those carbs. You'll make them through gluconeogenesis if you don't eat them. Okay? And so, but the rest of the body the rest of the body where the needs were flexible has mostly shifted to burning fat for fuel on a long-term ketogenic diet. So the real big problem is if you're not low carb enough to be keto, but you're way under 200, 250 grams of carbs a day. Like probably 100 grams of carbs a day is like, if it works for you, great. But if you have symptoms of low blood sugar at night, you shouldn't be spending a lot of time guessing why, because you're in this gray area where you are not keto adapted. Your brain still burns through 120 grams a day. Your liver still stores 90 grams a day. And the rest of your body still probably is preferentially burning carbs for energy instead of storing them for the most part, because the carbs are there, right? So your body's not deliberately, intensively reorganizing to conserve the carbohydrate in that gray area. On 50 grams, I don't know, how keto are you? It's more interesting to me whether you've had sustained 2, 3, 4, 5 millimoles per liter ketones in your blood than how many grams of carbs you're eating. Because if you do have sustained full-on ketogenesis, you're probably over time, over many weeks, you'll be very keto adapted. But if you don't, if you cycle between 0.5 and 1, I don't think you're going to be super keto adapted. And so I think you're probably in that gray area. Or if you're 50 grams of carbs a day and you don't have ketones, you're definitely in that gray area. So waking up in the middle of the night and staying up for hours, if you're on low carb, look at the carbs, definitely. Lawrence adds, I'm not on the ketogenic diet. Well, you might not be deliberately keto, but unless you test your ketones, we don't really know how ketogenic you are. So that's the big issue there. But again, you may have this problem on keto, but keto is way safer than being in this, what Denise Minger calls the macronutrient swampland, where you're kind of low carb, kind of high fat, but you're not really optimized for one or the other. I think that's probably the worst place to be from this perspective. And I'm not saying there's not other cause of waking up in the middle of the night. And I'm not saying that if you do have 50 to 100 grams of carbs, you will be in this place. I'm just saying if you are eating 50 or 100 grams of carbs and you are in this place, then you absolutely should connect the two and see if increasing your carbs helps. Your blood glucose is a little high. Low carb is not the best solution to high fasting glucose. There's a lot of people on low carb who have high fasting glucose. There's a ton of people who go low carb and develop high fasting glucose, right? So low carb helps you. If you are glucose intolerant, you absolutely will not get high postprandial glucose spikes when you don't eat carbs because you didn't eat the carbs. But your morning fasting glucose is only if your glucose tolerance is ridiculously bad is that glucose left over from the carbs you ate last night. in most cases, it's hormonally controlled. And there's nothing about low carb that modulates the hormones in the way that prevents that. Low carb modulates the hormones in the way that spikes that, because the hormones that raise your fasting glucose in the morning are, number one, glucagon, and then number two, compounded by adrenal hormones. And both of those are the early and late stage adaptations to low glucose supply. So, what raises your morning fasting glucose very acutely? Not sleeping good. Okay, so you're like, the case you're making is one for forgetting about the glucose and fixing your sleep. And what you're reporting says to me, definitely look at the carbs first in fixing the sleep. Anonymous attendee says, why would a male be low in calcium? Anonymous, do you write it in the chat if you want? Do you mean low in blood calcium, or do you mean low in bone calcium, or do you mean low in dietary calcium? So I'm going to assume that you mean low in blood calcium. You either have something wrong with parathyroid hormone governing your calcium levels, in which case you would want to see a doctor about that, or you have a long-going deficiency of related nutrients. So not enough calcium or not enough vitamin D. I mean, those should not cause low serum calcium unless the deficiency has been going on for a very long time and it's very bad. And then again, I don't know what measurement you're referring to. So maybe, sorry, my mic keeps messing up. So maybe the calcium was a tiny bit low, and you remeasure it and it's not low anymore. Maybe the calcium was a tiny bit low, and you measure it again, it's not low anymore, and it's a fluke. But if you're talking about like confirmed low serum calcium, then nutritionally, I would look at long-standing severe deficiencies of calcium and vitamin D would be what I'd be looking at, and I'd follow it up with measurements of PTH and calcitriol to better assess the situation. Anonymous says, what would you recommend to address low cortisol in the Dutch Plus test? Well, the first thing I would do is look at the readout of everything that they suggest to you, because they have done a lot of research on addressing potential causes of low cortisol. But what comes to my mind on low cortisol is, number one, inadequate rest. So I think the resting and recovering things are definitely things that you might want to focus on. And then I would look at whether you see low hormones in the sex hormone and thyroid axis. Like if you see all those low, then I would start looking at the brain in particular, and the things I said about vitamin C, copper, and glycine before. Anonymous says, for someone on a keto diet, 80 grams total carbs, 40 g net, greater than 1 ketones, I assume that's more than 1 millimolar beta hydroxybutyrate. What supplements would you recommend? Any concerns with carbs being that low? I don't know that I would specifically tailor supplements on the basis of this data. So someone's on a keto diet, they have 80 grams total carbs. I mean, where are the carbs coming from? That's really going to determine whether the person needs supplements. So on a keto diet in general, I think like, and protein too, right? If you're eating a lot of fat instead of protein, then you're going to need supplements of the things that are found in protein foods. If your carbs are all coming from, I don't know, honey, then you're going to need things that are found in vegetables. It's like you just can't tailor it based on that data. But probably the biggest things would be make sure you're getting a gram of protein per pound of body weight. If your ketones and goals can handle that load of protein, that'll protect you from a lot of nutrient deficiencies right there. Try to cook your proteins in ways that recapture the juices. That will help conserve the electrolytes. And you probably want salt and either a lot of low volume, low net carb vegetables, or you're probably going to need more potassium in your diet. So those are the big things that I look at. Anonymous says, are there any brands for getting 1,000 milligrams of resveratrol a day that you've tested and can recommend? I don't know that I recommend taking, well, actually, I shouldn't say I don't know. I don't currently recommend anyone take resveratrol. And so I, for that reason, don't have a brand to recommend. I guess the reason that I don't recommend resveratrol is, okay, what is resveratrol doing? Well, almost all of the polyphenols that are found across the plant kingdom are regarded as toxins by the body and upregulate the body's defenses. This is called hormesis, the principle. Principle of hormesis is a little bit of something that's bad is good for you. And you could take, now on the other hand, all of these also have very much more specific effects. So like resveratrol does things that epicatechin gallate doesn't do and vice versa. Like out of the thousands of polyphenols, they also are effectively natural drugs of sorts because they act on receptors in the body and do specific things. So resveratrol acts through hormesis, but I don't, unless someone has a very targeted reason to do so, I think it's much better to just eat a diet rich in unrefined plant foods as the first thing. If you have signs that your antioxidant defenses are poor and just putting in the nutrients you need doesn't do it, then at that point I might say, well, maybe you want something that acts hormetically. I feel most comfortable with milk thistle in most cases. Although I still don't have any brand recommendations on that. For resveratrol, resveratrol also has some effects that are kind of like metformin. And if someone wants me to talk about that, ask it in another question. But I might as well address it here. So there are a lot of things out there that will mimic. I'll say it briefly. There are a lot of things out there that mimic the fasting state that are cheap imitations of fasting that I think are definitely good for someone who's in a chronically overfed state relative to the alternative of just being in a chronically overfed state, right? So the obese person with type 2 diabetes benefits from metformin because they have no fasting state naturally. Sorry, the microphone keeps falling. That person has no fasting state naturally. And so they benefit from getting part of it mimicked. But the person who has lean body composition, a healthy body composition, a healthy diet and lifestyle, and does go through the fasting feeding cycle, that is not better made with the addition of a cheap imitation. That is the product. That is the premium product instead of the cheap imitation. Lawrence Tam says, what are the downsides for a meat dairy diet devoid of fruits and vegetables in the long term? You've already answered this one. Many thanks. I agree. Okay, cool. Anonymous attendee says, are there any protocols, treatments you recommend to eliminate SIBO and H. pylori? I would work with someone who specializes in the gut, which I don't. So I would work with someone in, I'd work with someone in Chris Kresser's office. I've done some work with Analia Camarasa. I hope I'm saying her name right. I would work with someone who and there are other people among my colleagues who do gut work, but find someone who works on the gut. In terms of eliminating SIBO and H. pylori, I'll make some quick comments. So on SIBO, well, the antibiotic cocktails have been studied quite a lot, and so there's that. In terms, but the thing then is, have you addressed the things that cause it? Because if you have a chronic cause of SIBO and you take antibiotics to get rid of it in 2 weeks, or you take the disgusting elemental diet for 2 weeks to get rid of it, or you take the very restrictive GAPS diet for 2 years to get rid of it, and you don't address what is causing it, you're just going to get it back again when you go off whatever those things are. And so I think that the two big things are, you can probably guess based on whether your test results show that the gases are produced earlier versus later. If the gases are produced earlier, you probably have SIBO in the proximal, in other words, in the upper small intestine, like soon after leaving the stomach. If you have test results showing gases later, you probably have the SIBO in the distal small intestine, meaning at the end of the small intestine when it starts reaching the colon. And so if it's in the upper small intestine, I think something is going on in the stomach, like hypochloridia. You aren't making the stomach acid necessary to kill the bugs that come in. If it's distal, I think you're not cleaning the intestines out. Things are leaking back up the other way, or you're just not pushing them out fast enough. So off the top of my head, over-methylation or not eating enough protein could lower histamine levels in the gut. Histamine in the stomach is the signal that makes stomach acid. So that's one thing. Not having enough salt in the diet and having anything wrong with your energy metabolism would compromise the secretion of stomach acids. Those are the other things that I'd look at. Taking baking soda or potassium bicarbonate with meals is another thing that I'd look at. So I would look at those. If you have to, you could take hydrochloric acid, betaine HCl. Standard protocol is take 1 with a meal, titrate up slowly until you get acid reflux. When you do, cut back 1 and keep it at the dose that doesn't cause acid reflux. And then if it's distal, if it's at the end of the small intestine, I think ginger, lactobacillus on an empty stomach are big things. And then I think remaining upright in the couple hours after you eat a meal is big. And this is a fact of life that I don't like, because I would prefer to eat my evening meal and lay back on the couch. But eating food and laying down for 3 hours afterwards will probably cause SIBO, and it will probably prevent you from the SIBO getting better. So you really want to try to eat your last meal a few hours before you go to bed. And you really want to get as much time doing errands or standing up and moving if possible. So go for a walk, do things around the house that are cleaning up at the end of the night. And then for at least another hour, if you're going to watch TV or something like that, don't lay back, but set up some pillows and sit upright, because gravity is it's really good for the gut. And so you got to leverage that. H. pylori, mastic gum has been shown to be good for H. pylori on its own, but you might want to there are some supplements that are designed for it, what's it called? Can anyone put in the chat box? Anyone remember I think GastroMend is the name of it. Let me Google that to make sure I have it right. Designs for Health GastroMend HP is a cocktail made for H. pylori. So both of those might be good. Also, all the things that I said before about negatively impacting stomach acid are super relevant to H. pylori as well. Anonymous says, what do you think about taking Clomid to boost testosterone to the higher end of the normal range? I haven't researched Clomid. I'm sorry. Maybe another time. Anonymous says, how do you determine if you're getting enough protein? I've heard Dr. Stephen Finney say, for those on a keto diet, if ketones are greater than 3 on a regular basis, then it's a sign you're not getting enough protein. Yeah. Okay, that's like, okay, first of all, why are you on a ketogenic diet? So like, if you're like the things that like, if your purpose is to get the ketones, why wouldn't you want your ketones higher than 3? Like the ketogenic diet is regardless of what people are doing it for, it's best tested in terms of epilepsy. And the classical ketogenic diet gets ketone levels up to 3 or 4 millimoles per liter, or sometimes higher. So then the question is like, you're not doing it for medical therapy. Why are you doing it? If you're doing it to lose weight, you probably like, who cares what your ketones are? Like there's a ton of people out there who are on a ketogenic diet who don't care what their ketones are because they're doing it for like weight loss or body composition or to feel better. If those are what your goals are, your metrics should just be whether you're losing weight, whether you're getting better gut body composition, or whether you're feeling better, right? Like there's no data backing up the fact that you can measure your blood ketones and determine what any of those outcomes are going to be. So you should just use the metric that you want. That has like, that has nothing to do with why you need protein. Yes, too much protein is probably going to lower your ketones. Like protein is anti-ketogenic. It's not as anti-ketogenic as carbs are. So I get the kernel of truth that Finney is getting at, that the higher your protein is, the lower your ketones are going to be. And maybe there's some general correlation that he's seen across people, that the people who tend to have ketones that high tend to not be eating enough protein. But that's a correlation that has nothing to do with the underlying reason of why you eat protein. You eat protein because you need protein to optimize your neurotransmitters. You need protein to optimize your metabolism, and you need protein to optimize your body composition. And the number one metric that we have on protein intakes and quantifying them is on body composition. And you want a 0.5 gram to 1 gram of protein for every pound of target body weight. So if you're trying to gain muscle, use what you want to have at the end of gaining muscle. If you are overweight, use what your ideal weight would be. And the more you care about your body composition, the more you should aim for the top of that range instead of the bottom. And it doesn't matter if you're keto or not. Carol Matt says, what would you suggest for nutritional support for those who experience edema due to third spacing? Carol, I'm sorry, but I don't know what third spacing is. Can you chat what you mean? And I'll go to the next question. And if you can clarify, like I'm sorry if this is a women's health issue and I just am not in that area, but if you can clarify what you mean in the chat, I'll come back to that question. So Anonymous says, what do you think of taking Avmacol to support sulforaphane production? I don't know what you mean sulforaphane production, because Anonymous, can you clarify in the chat what you mean by production? Because we don't make sulforaphane. So oh, okay. I think, Anonymous, I think what you're asking is, Anonymous, I think what you're asking is to take this supplement to get the sulforaphane that the supplement is broken down into. I haven't done enough research to comment on specific products and brands. I will make a general point about sulforaphane, which is all of the good for you things in cruciferous vegetables are the bad for you things in cruciferous vegetables. As I said before, all of these compounds that are like phytonutrients are all regarded as toxins by the body, and they all have potential benefits and potential harms. So the potential benefit of sulforaphane is primarily in upregulating defenses. There are some other things that I think for high estrogen, it might have some specific applications that you wouldn't get from milk thistle or just eating a lot of fruits and vegetables. I think the downside to sulforaphane is it will compete with iodine uptake into the thyroid and mammary glands. So I think if you're going to use a sulforaphane product, you should be making sure that you're getting at least 200 micrograms of iodine in the diet. And you should watch out for any kind of brain fog. I'm not saying that will happen. I'm saying if it does happen, it's probably related to iodine. Okay, I'm going to come back to Carol's question. So Carol's asking about where water gets caught between the cell spaces when too much fluid moves from the intravascular space into the interstitial or third space non-functional area between cells. Carol, maybe you and I are going to have a more in-depth conversation about this at some point, because that's not like the interstitial space is not a non-functional area. It's continuous with the blood. So I'm going to bring this back more general to my understanding of edema, I think. So edema is basically going to be caused by excess salt retention in the body. And the reason is that, with exception of very extreme scenarios, your body's going to tightly regulate the sodium concentration of the water in your body, and sodium draws water. Now, that's not to say that the cause is eating salt. And there are cases where eating salt might remove edema, but generally salt retention of total water volume is going to be a big factor. In hypothyroidism, it becomes, I believe, at least partly about glycoproteins in those spaces that are holding onto water. So I would say if it's thyroid related, you're not really talking about nutritional support, you're talking about fixing the thyroid. Maybe that means nutritional support, but it might mean other things. But the nutrition's aimed at the thyroid, not the edema. Maybe manganese, maybe, I'm just totally guessing, maybe manganese would help modulate those glycoproteins in hypothyroidism the same way that it does in making sticking and regulating the stickiness of the arterial wall. I'm totally guessing on that. But edema very often, like in the edema in the menstrual cycle, for example, premenstrual edema is caused by high aldosterone, which is probably caused by high progesterone. And I know that everyone in alternative health thinks that progesterone is a good hormone and estrogen is a bad hormone. But in PMS water retention, I believe progesterone is just accumulating so much that it's spilling into aldosterone. And I genuinely don't know what to do about the high progesterone, but about the high aldosterone, I do. Oh, so magnesium and B6 have been shown to help with that. Magnesium, I did an episode about that. So I would Google Masterjohn what to do about menstrual weight gain for more details on that. But magnesium and B6, and then I would play around with salt and potassium. So generally, less salt during that time and more potassium in the diet are potentially going to be helpful. And I think the principles are going to be similar elsewhere. Like, it doesn't have to be in the menstrual cycle. You are generally going to find that salt is increasing extracellular water and potassium is increasing intracellular water. And that's often going to be a factor in edema that can't be tied to thyroid hormone. Tiana says in the chat, I remember you talking about this in your podcast. Any other references you can recommend to research this idea? I will. I'll go back and look at that short episode I did, and if there's not a paper on it, I'll update the notes of this one with a paper on that. Okay, we have 15 minutes left. There are 9 questions left. I'm going to try to breeze through them. It would be best if you don't ask more questions, because anything that's added I won't get to. In the future, I'll play around with the number of people in here, the format, and the length of time. But today I do have something that I need to get to in 15 minutes. So I'll try to go through this fast. Anonymous says, what do you think of alternative testing like hair mineral analysis or SpectraCell? I'm against SpectraCell on the basis that it's not validated. I gave more details in a podcast episode, what makes a good marker of nutritional status. And you can find that at chrismasterjohnphd.com/marker. And hair mineral analysis, I like hair mineral analysis when there's nothing better and more validated. And so for a lot of the trace minerals where we don't have good validated markers of nutritional status, I think hair mineral analysis is good. And I think hair mineral analysis is also good if you don't have the money to do something comprehensive with all the best markers, and you want something that can clue you in when something might be off. So the nice thing about it is with less money, you cover all the minerals. The less nice thing about it is it's not very well validated quantitatively. Like even where there's data, like for example, it is validated that your iron in your hair tends to be higher when your iron in your body is higher and vice versa. But it's not validated to say when hair is X amount, this is when you need more iron. And when the hair is Y amount, this is when you need less. The way that the blood markers are, like transferrin saturation, ferritin, hemoglobin, all these more validated markers, we have tons of quantitative data saying like the normal range is this, the optimal range is this. And so you lose the precision when you go back to the hair mineral analysis. So I wouldn't use it. The thing is, if you spend $200 on a hair mineral analysis, that's $200 that you can't put towards your Genova ion panel, or $200. Like you could have gotten 4 iron panels with that, right? So you have to be careful that if your financial resources are constrained, you might want to do the hair mineral analysis on that basis, but it might be a better financial decision long term to hold on to that money and do free stuff. And, in testing nutritional status, the ultimate cheat sheet, what I say is if you don't have the money for the comprehensive testing, you focus on the things that are free. You do the dietary and lifestyle analysis, you do the symptom analysis, and then you go to the things that indicates is most probable, and then you do the best validated tests. Like maybe this diet and symptom analysis all points you to iron, and you spend $60 on an iron panel, and that gives you more payoff than $200 on a hair mineral analysis. So it's not an obvious choice about when to get the suboptimal test, but it's something you have to think about carefully. Anonymous says, calcium score, is there a way to treat one's calcium score? No, you don't treat the calcium score. You take the calcium score as indicative of what's going on in atherosclerosis, and you treat that. That is, if I seek to get a calcium score of 0, is there a nutritional way to do that? Probably not. Docs I have talked to tell me there is no way. I followed K2 since your elusive X Factor article, but when Reem Blue's calcium paradox came out, I read it, light bulb went off, and I went to Whole Foods and no K2. It was a bit early. I've taken all sorts of K2 since then. Currently, your recommendation, Innovix Labs Full Spectrum K2, and I heard your recent podcast. My belief is that this strategy has no effect in my case on my calcium score. Well, that would be an indication that you do not have a deficiency of K2, or that whatever is driving your calcium score isn't related to K2, or that you didn't have enough K2. Like those are the 3 possibilities there. I've not retested, but I'm pretty sure that K2's promise is not realized in my case. Very possible. Then I read about the polling therapy last month. Vitamin C isn't toxic, so what the heck? Too early to tell, but it sounds reasonable. Sadly, life is often not arranged by what seems reasonable to me. Yeah, join the club. So the goal, I think, is calcium score equals 0. No, that's a bad goal because that's like saying like my goal this year is to be a a billionaire. Like, is that going to make me harder and get closer to it? I don't know. You like set somewhere what the what the ideal is, but then you don't think about that. You think about like, okay, what's the next step right now in front of me? And what you focus on is the thing that's right in front of you. So maybe like you want to be a billionaire, but your goal is like, how do I increase my revenue this month? Not how do I be a billionaire this year? So if you want a calcium score of 0, fine. But you don't think about that. You think about like, how do I lower my calcium score? Because then when you lower your calcium score, you do more of that. And when you do something that raises your calcium score, you do less of that. So look, calcium is super driven in atherosclerosis. Calcium is super driven by the atherosclerotic progress. So ideally, you have. It would be nice if you had ultrasound imaging of your carotid IMT, so that. Oh, by the way, I'm not a doctor. I'm not treating anything here. I'm just talking about this academically. It'd be nice to see data on a carotid IMT because you may. And like actually, you usually don't even get this data. You just get whatever they think is important. But you will like if you have advanced plaque formation, you probably will be able to see that on the IMT. Like you can see how the plaque is developing and whether the actual atherosclerotic plaque is whether that progress is bad. Because if so, that's what drives local calcium deposits, and that's probably what's showing up at the coronary calcium score. And K2 is relevant there, but a general deficiency of K2 is more likely to manifest as diffuse calcium deposits everywhere in the artery. And that's when you would be especially focused on K2. So if it might be that your LDL is high and then like, that's what you should be focusing on. So you really have to start from like point A through B through C. And K2 is one of those things where you just look at like, what are all the factors that could be contributing to atherosclerosis? And which one of them looks worse than me? And that's what you try to focus on. And so we don't have there's not enough data in your question to get into all the other possibilities. Anonymous says, what are your recommendations on magnesium supplements and dosage? Would you mix slow mag, which is magnesium chloride and calcium for absorption, electrolyte balance, and magnesium oxide or glycinate to help with bowel function? Or sprays like Ease or Ancient Minerals? I've used a bunch of this stuff, and at the end of the day, my opinion is that most people shouldn't be supplementing with high doses of magnesium. And I think if you're going to supplement with more than 400 milligrams a day, you should be testing your magnesium status and you should be making decisions on that. I think there's way too many people throwing really high doses of magnesium into their system. The topical stuff makes sense if you're not absorbing it poorly, but hey, maybe you're not absorbing it poorly because you don't need it. And so I think you really have to judge it against like real metrics of results. And this light, let's see, is this lighting better like this? Maybe it is. Okay. I think you have to judge it against real metrics of results, and that's that. So in terms of types, I would not recommend magnesium oxide for anything. It's poorly absorbed, so maybe you could argue that magnesium oxide is going to help act as a laxative better, but that's not bowel function. That's like pharmacologically modulating your bowel transit time. So I don't think it makes sense to deliberately take a poorly absorbed magnesium to have that effect. I think you should take, the good sources of magnesium are magnesium citrate is okay, glycinate is okay, malate is okay. All across the board, I genuinely don't believe that the dose is that the form is that important. It's just that oxides of minerals, including magnesium, are generally poorly absorbed. But there's not that much difference in the other forms, I don't think. And tailor it to the individual. I wouldn't give blanket recommendations there. If Anonymous says, if cholesterol, LDP, and oxidized LDL are high, The sterile panel is normal and TGs are great. Would you suspect clearance of the particles driven by LDL receptor in the liver is the issue? And what would you recommend to boost LDLR? And then Kristen Krausik says, this sounds like my hereditary hypercholesterolemia. Total LDL and LDLP are ridiculously high, and HDL and triglycerides are normal. Mark Lanza says same. I don't know who it was it was Kristen who asked about this at the beginning. So I would say review what I said in response to Kristen's question at the beginning. But briefly, yes, it sounds like you should target LDLR, and the big regulators of LDLR function are thyroid hormone and the amount of cholesterol in the liver cell. And anything that brings bile acids into the feces, and that's generally a high fiber diet, psyllium husk would be a fiber you could add, is going to target the cholesterol in the liver. Thyroid hormone is going to target, well, thyroid hormone is the other piece of that, and that you target with higher carbohydrate intake. Higher carbohydrate intake also acts on PCSK9 to boost LDL receptor activity. So there's multiple avenues by which carbohydrate is increasing LDL receptor activity. And then if you have a thyroid disorder, you got to deal with it, right? So there are other aspects of treating thyroid that go beyond that. Anonymous says, do you think taking milk thistle is beneficial? And if so, recommendations, brands, dosage, etc. I think it can be as a booster of antioxidant status. I think it's secondary to eating a lot of fruits and vegetables, herbs and spices. And I don't right now have specific brands and dosages to recommend because I just haven't been recommending it as a product. And so I haven't done that research. Anonymous says, do you have any concerns with taking 400 milligrams of phosphatidylserine supplements like Gero PS100 daily before bed to lower cortisol? Concerns? No. I would test it, see if it works. If it works, there's nothing I'm worrying about with that. Anonymous says, what would cause platelets being on the lowest end of the range and possible fixes? If it's isolated platelets, off the top of my head, I don't know of a nutritional cause, and I would consult the doctor and a general lab reference on that. Anonymous says, any recommendations for peripheral neuropathy testing vitamin B, lion's mane? Okay, first of all, there's no such thing as vitamin B. I'm not trying to be a nitpick, but there's literally almost a dozen B vitamins with different tests that do different things. So I think it's important to establish a habit of never saying vitamin B because, not to be like a grammar nitpick, but like, I just think it's misleading to think about the concept of vitamin B. So there are quite a few B vitamin deficiencies that can cause peripheral neuropathy. You can also cause peripheral neuropathy by taking vitamin B6 in too high doses. And that's one of the reasons why you have to separate them out, because B6 is unique among the other B vitamins in that respect. So, look, I have let's see, in testing nutritional status, the ultimate cheat sheet, I have an index of signs. And if we go into peripheral neuropathy, I have listed here deficiencies of thiamine, riboflavin, and vitamin E, toxicity of selenium and B6. So those are the top nutritional things that I would be looking at for that. Anonymous attendee, last question at 12:59 with 1 minute on the clock, says, what are your top 3 non-nutrient factors that prevent someone from entering beta oxidation or ketogenesis? Top 3 non-nutrient factors? Unless you are unless you're taking a drug that prevents lipolysis, then they aren't non-nutrient. They're like the overwhelming things that govern those are carbohydrate and fat intake. So, You eat more fat, you have more beta oxidation. You eat less fat, you have less beta oxidation. You eat less carbohydrate beyond a threshold. Like sleep disruption. Adam, I don't think sleep disruption is going to do that. Sleep disruption is going to increase your stress hormones. And so, sleep disruption, your cortisol is going to spike, and it's going to increase your appetite for junk food. So you're probably more likely to eat things that are anti-ketogenic when you're sleep deprived because you're eating more junk food, which has more carbs in it. You probably are not going to have lower beta oxidation. You're probably going to have higher beta oxidation because you're going to eat more fat. But most people do not have impairments in beta oxidation. Like if you have a riboflavin deficiency, you can have an impairment in beta oxidation. But like even in disease states, beta oxidation is higher. Like if you have a fatty liver, beta oxidation is increased because your liver is just trying to get rid of fat. The overwhelming thing governing beta oxidation is the relative balance of fat going into your tissues versus out. So carbs, to the extent carbs displace the fat from being burned, carbohydrate is going to decrease beta oxidation. But if you're eating carbohydrate and you're eating more fat versus less fat, you're going to have more beta oxidation when you eat more fat. So yes, sleep disruption will disrupt the appropriate way of handling those things, but I don't think it's going to block ketogenesis or beta oxidation except by messing up your appetite.
This episode is brought to you by Ancestral Supplements. Traditional peoples, Native Americans, and early ancestral healers believed that eating the organs from a healthy animal would strengthen and support the health of the corresponding organ of the individual. For example, the traditional way of treating a person with a weak heart was to feed the person the heart of a healthy animal. Modern science makes sense of this. Heart is uniquely rich in coenzyme Q10, which supports heart health. The importance of eating organs, though, is much broader than simply matching the organ you eat to the organ you want to nourish. For example, natives of the Arctic had very limited access to plant foods and got their vitamin C from adrenal glands. And vitamin C is important to far more parts of your body than simply your adrenals. In his epic work, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, Weston Price recorded a story of natives who cured blindness using eyeballs, which are very rich in vitamin A. But now that we understand vitamin A, we know that we can get even more vitamin A by eating liver, making liver good for your eyes. Our ancestors made liberal use of organ meats both to be economical and to utilize their healing and nourishing properties. Animals in the wild do the same. Weston Price had also recorded a story of how the zoos in his era were capturing lions, tigers, and leopards, oh my, only to watch them become infertile in captivity. Researchers then observed what the lions did when they killed zebras in the wild. What they did was they went straight for the organs and bone marrow, leaving the muscle meat behind for the birds. But even the birds took what they could of the organs and bone marrow. Price reported that once the zookeepers started feeding the animals organ meats, boom, their fertility returned. The problem I often encounter, though, is that many people just don't like eating organ meats. Let's face it, if you weren't raised on them, it can be very hard to acquire a taste for them. That is where Ancestral comes in. Ancestral Supplements has a nose-to-tail product line of grass-fed liver, organ meats, living collagen, bone marrow, and more, all in the convenience of a gelatin capsule. For more information or to buy any of their products, go to ancestralsupplements.com. Ancestral Supplements, putting back in what the modern world has left out. This episode is brought to you by Ample. Ample is incredible. It's a meal in a bottle that takes a total of 2 minutes to prepare, consume, and clean up. 2 minutes. I'm not kidding. Now, I know what you're thinking. Anything that quick just has to be made of synthetic ingredients that you'd have a hard time pronouncing and wouldn't want to put into your body. But it's not. Ample is made entirely from natural ingredients and designed to provide an optimal balance between protein, fat, and carbs, as well as all the vitamins and minerals that you'd need in a single meal. There's no question that it's always best to sit down and take your time eating a home-cooked meal
from fresh ingredients. But let's face it, oftentimes we just don't have time for that. If you live a busy life like I do and your goal is to get things done, you need quality fuel that you can get into your system quickly. Here's a great example where Ample is perfect for me. When I shoot videos, it takes hours to set up and break down all of my equipment. So I try to get as many videos shot in a day as possible. This prevents wasting a lot of time on setup and helps me conserve big blocks of time outside of shooting videos to get into a flow state where I can research something to my heart's content and spend all the time I need thinking about it creatively and analytically. But if I spend hours dealing with recording equipment plus hours spent preparing food, eating it, and cleaning up, there's no time left over to actually shoot any videos. So on recording days, I use Ample to maximize efficiency and focus on getting things done. Ample comes in 3 versions: original, keto, and vegan. And each version comes in 2 portion sizes, 400 calorie and 600 calorie. The 600 calorie original version gives me 37 grams of protein from a mix of grass-fed whey and collagen, which promotes satiety and flips my brain on. Its fat comes from coconut oil and macadamia nut oil. I like these oils because they're low in polyunsaturated fatty acids, or PUFAs, oils that promote aging and are usually loaded into the processed foods that most people eat when they need something on the go. The coconut oil provides some medium-chain fats to keep my energy levels up, too. The carbs, the vitamins, and the minerals all come exclusively from food sources like sweet potatoes, bananas, cocoa powder, wheat and barley grass, and chlorella. It's full of natural prebiotic fibers and probiotics to promote a healthy microbiome, and the gentle sweetness comes from a mix of honey, monk fruit, and stevia. I just mix it with water, drink it, rinse out the bottle, and boom. 2 minutes in, and I'm fully fueled and ready to face the next phase of the day. I first came across Ample when I met its founder and CEO, Connor Young, at PaleoFX a few years ago. Connor inspired me with his vision for Ample, which I anticipate will be much more than a meal in a bottle in the near future. I've become an official advisor to Ample, and I'll be helping Ample design scientific research that will lead both to an ever-improving Ample and, I hope, meaningful contributions to our understanding of how to use nutrition to help people be healthier and happier and perform better at the challenges that they care most about. As a listener to the Mastering Nutrition podcast, I've also worked out a special deal for you. If you use the discount code CHRIS15, you'll get 15% off your first order of Ample. To get your discount, go to amplemeal.com. That's amplemeal.com, 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 and use the code CHRIS15 at checkout.
All right, everyone, I hope you found this useful and or enjoyed it. If you would like to get in on the next Ask Me Anything session, join the CMJ Masterpass. The CMJ Masterpass is an all-access pass to premium features on all my audio-video content. That includes Chris Masterjohn Lite, which are short, practical tips. It includes Mastering Nutrition, which are long-form deep dives into specific content, or in this case, the recordings of these Ask Me Anything shows. It also includes Masterclass with Masterjohn, which are nutritional biochemistry courses with lessons in the series designed to really help you dig down deep and understand and master a specific system in the body. So far, that includes the antioxidant system and includes the energy metabolism session. You don't have to love all of these features. You can love just one of them, and that will make you want to sign up for the Masterpass. So if you only want to get in on these Ask Me Anything sessions, then that's a good reason to sign up. You can sign up at chrismasterjohnphd.com/masterpass/mastering nutrition, and using that specific link, or you can just go into the description of this episode and click on the link, and using that link will get you 10% off for the lifetime of the program. So as long as you stay a member, you continue getting that 10% off month after month or year after year. All right, so hope to see you inside the Masterpass. And hey, whether you sign up or not, I will see you in the next episode.